So I'd like to introduce Jeffrey Strauss. He's a keynote speaker and a regular at a lot of the conferences that I attend, so I'm a big fan. Come on up, Jeffrey.
All right. Real quick, can we just everyone's applauding for all the volunteers who are amazing. Can we get a little applause for Gaines? I mean, what he's done in 4 years, amazing. Amazing. All right, so who learned something in the last 3 days? Yeah, right. Okay, who learned a lot in the last 3 days? Good. I love when people raise their hands. Good job. All right. Who learned something that just sort of you saw something happen and just totally blew your mind? A few. Okay. So here's the thing. Now, you don't have to raise your hands. It's okay. But for me, when I leave a conference, all right, I have this thing where I go to a conference and I think, oh, I'm pretty smart. I know stuff, right? I know things. And I leave a conference and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know anything, right? I leave a conference and I think, I don't know how to do anything, right? And that can be hard. It can be hard. So I kind of I get this thing, well, I'm kind of this recurring theme of a brick wall, right? I will leave a conference and I'm going to be like, what do I do? Where do I go? I saw this amazing talk about the newest JavaScript thing, the newest data platforms, the newest trends in agile processes, things like that. And I'm going to go and I want to say, I want to use this thing, but I don't even know where to begin. Right? No matter how good the talk is. Right? What I want to say is, hey, this is so great. I got sunshine and rainbows and everything's happy. This is amazing. I learned all these things. But really, no. I get the wall. Maybe this happens to no one but me, right? Maybe it's my own problem. But I have this feeling all the time. And what's worse is that it can kind of creep up in the way where you kind of have this wall in front of you, and it's sort of you go to turn, and every way you go, I walked in and there was sunshine and rainbows behind me, right? I knew stuff, and I walked and I saw the wall, and I turned around and there's a wall there now too. And you feel kind of stuck, right? So we use a lot of words for that kind of feeling, right? I mean, yeah, it's anxiety, but a lot of times you talk about roadblocks and obstacles, hurdles, things get in your way, right? We use these kinds of words because it feels tangible, right? It feels physical, right? When you get stuck and you don't know where to go next, it feels like you're physically blocked in. But really, it's just adversity. That's adversity. We're going to talk for a little bit of time we have here today about adversity. And how you handle it and tackle it. Now, before we go into it too much, I'm going to kind of take a few minutes and sort of tell a bit about me and my background and why I think about this stuff and why it's passionate to me. Because this is a new talk, but I've been thinking about it and talking to it actually with several people who are in the room now for a year. Right? I've been thinking about this for a long time. So back in the day, I'm sorry, but I'm a lawyer. I'm sorry. If this were a law talk, I'd say I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. But I don't have to do that here because I'm not talking about legal stuff. But I practiced law. I'm from St. Louis, right? And I practiced law for several years in private practice before I got into the technology field. And when I reached a point in that career where I realized I was kind of progressing. I was doing really well for a guy in my late 20s, except I hated it. I was miserable. So I decided to start over. Now, what I do, what's the natural thing for a lawyer to become? A programmer. That makes sense, right? So the thing is, really, before I ever went to law school, right, I was building computers as a kid, and my undergraduate degree started in computer science and electrical engineering. Then I joined a fraternity, and I ended up managing an on-campus bar and all those sorts of things, and then I got a psychology degree. So I ended up going to law school because that made more sense than going into some sort of serious engineering field. But I was starting from scratch, completely from scratch. And then moreover, over time I realized I didn't like this whole just being a developer, sitting at a desk, being in a cube. And a few years ago, after doing a lot of consulting for various firms over several years, I ended up acquiring half of a business from a dear friend, a guy named Jay Harris, who owned a company called Arana Software. So I kind of started over again. I kind of had this cushy thing going. I said, you know what, instead, I'm going to take all this money I've been saving up, and I'm just going to like throw it into this thing, and I'm going to buy half this business. I'm going to run it with this guy who doesn't live in St. Louis, right? He lived in Michigan. Now he lives in Las Vegas. And I kind of had to start over again and figure out what that meant and redefine my role again. And then, just in the last like 6 months, I was supposed to give this talk actually at CodeMash, and like a little bit of a sort of a shame on me thing. I actually like totally bailed and backed out because I was so freaked out because I was going through another transition and I was facing a lot of pain back in January because in the late last fall we kind of had a bit of a downturn in business. Now, the business is great, still a going concern, and what I realized for the sanity of myself and for my family, after thinking all I wanted my entire life was to own a small business, I realized, wait a second, maybe that's not it. Maybe that's not it. So now I'm navigating like being in the corporate world again, and really in a way that I never have been before. Now I work for a big company called Worldwide Technology, Asynchrony Labs in St. Louis. It's great, but it's something that I never thought I would do. Right? Now, that's one kind of starting over. What really got me thinking about this topic was that meanwhile, remember I mentioned Jay. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because then I get upset. But remember, so Jay is my business partner. He's about my age, or he was my business partner. He's about my age. He's like 3 months older than me. We have kids who are almost the same age. He had a great life going, a nice business, everything was fine. And a few years ago, right as I was coming into his business, his wife, who was I think 32 at the time, had a terrible car crash and died. Now, that's a whole different thing. Right? That's a whole different thing. But what's amazing is I watched him as we tried to grow the business together. As, you know, he's my friend, right? As I tried to talk through and see how he recovered from this. And what I realized was that over time, and it's been a few years now, over time, like, new stuff grew from the ashes of that. The worst thing imaginable. I cannot imagine that, right? I have a wife and 2 young children. I can't even imagine what he went through, but like new stuff rose from that ash. Now, he had a lot of changes. He moved to Las Vegas. He's in a new relationship. Everything's going great, but he's doing well. And what I started realizing when I watched him and I thought about what he went through, and then I thought about my professional transitions and my life transitions, is that even though there's no comparison of the scope of what I've dealt with versus what he was dealing with, you know, like everyone's pain is subjective, right? Like everyone's personal pain in the moment is right? You know, you can't put yourself in somebody else's shoes, but all you know is what you have to go through. And I realized that the steps I went through to kind of go through career transitions, buying a business, starting a new career, leaving law, and what he had to do to go through and kind of recover from the pain of his family tragedy were kind of the same thing. So then I started watching all of my friends in the industry, all my professional colleagues, and watched when they hit big brick walls and didn't know where to go. And I realized the people who were successfully getting through, right, who were successfully getting through that adversity were really actually kind of doing the same things too. So, what I want to talk about here with adversity, one thing, and we'll touch on this a couple of times, is I think language is important. Like words mean something, right? And so we use this word adversity, but really like adversity is just transition. Right? Like adversity is really just a set of transitions. And transition is hard because by definition, transition means the death of the old and the rebirth of something new. Right? That's what transition is. And, you know, like death and birth are painful, sort of messy processes. Right? Like transition's hard. So what I'm going to talk about, and this is going to be kind of weird because I feel, and I was talking to Gaines about this, like this comes off in a way as like a pop psychology, like, you know, 12-step self-help sort of talk. That's not really what it is. Like really it's not. Partially because there's only 4 steps. But also partially because this is more, I want to talk a bit about like my experiences and what I've observed, right? And we're mathematicians and computer scientists, we're engineers, right? We like frameworks. We like to think about things. So what I realized I've developed over time is like I have a mental framework. I have a mental framework for how I approach challenges in my life. I'm not saying that's what like everyone should do and stop everything and go to step 1 and do this thing. What I want to share with you is sort of the things I think about when I hit that wall and I turn around and the wall's here and here and here and I don't know where to go. These are the things I force myself to think through to help me get through, and maybe some of it will apply to some of you and help you next time you feel that way. Maybe you walk out of here today and you think, man, I saw that awesome thing, I didn't know where to go, but hey, maybe I can kind of follow some stuff like this and get somewhere. So, first off, when I'm not sure what to do, the first thing, and I think this is common, is you got to take sort of like a self-inventory, right? Like, okay, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. I had this business going. It's not going well. I suddenly realized maybe I didn't want to have this business going anymore. And so I think it's very common. A lot of times we take this period of self-reflection, right? We want to look in the mirror, figuratively or literally, and assess where we are. Here's the thing about reflection. And I'm not saying don't do this. In fact, do it. But there's a key. What I think is important is objective assessment, objective self-assessment. And the thing about reflection is, right, when we look in the mirror, we don't see ourselves, right? This is, I had to have a cat picture, right? It's sort of this old idea of the kitten looks in the mirror and sees the lion. And that's great, right? If you're well, I look in the mirror and I'm confident and I see something, something huge and even better than myself looking back. That can be a good thing. But really, in the difficult times when we're not sure, we're uncertain of ourselves, it's totally possible. Maybe you're the lion, right? Maybe you're the lion looking in the mirror and what you see is the little cat looking back at you. Either way, the trouble with just doing self-reflection, looking in a mirror, for me, is that the one thing you never actually get when you look in the mirror is the truth. You get some. You get some. But I want to reach a point where I can make good decisions, right? And you can only make good decisions if you're really thinking about trying to reach a point of objective truth. So when I'm stuck, right, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to figure out what's next. Okay, well, the business is failing, or not necessarily failing, but it's going through a tough time, or I'm going through a tough time, or, oh, I hate being a lawyer, I don't want to do this anymore, but what am I going to do? Oh, I was at the SEMJS meetup, and then I got a phone call that my wife died. What am I going to do? What's next? And to do that, I can't just look in the mirror and think about it myself. Right? You got to actually ask questions, because in the starting over times, I'm a very emotional, subjective sort of person. I don't really do objective things. One of the reasons I stress out so much about talks, and Gaines knows this entire day, I'm oh, I hope I can deliver something of value here during this, is because I don't spend a lot of time thinking through every single word, every single thing, because I like to be in the moment. I like to do things subjectively. That's great. Emotion can be powerful, but when you're stuck and when your emotions are negative, then you need to actually force yourself to, it's the pros and cons, the charts, and asking, how am I going to get from here to there, and what is it I should do? And not only think about how I feel about it, but, it's sort of the, what would so-and-so do? What would, I don't care. Insert your own, confidant, family member, deity of choice, persona, right? Ideally, multiple personas, right? People who you respect. People who you trust. Think about them from their perspectives and try to sort of step outside of what your subjective experience is and say, well, what would this person tell me to do? Now, my dear friend John Mills, I was talking about exactly this thing, and he spoke here. If you've seen him speak before, you know him. He kind of does one of these. I said, well, you need to think about what other people would do, and he kind of goes, is that really possible? Sort of, but he made a good point. So here's the thing. I think it's important to do those things so you know what questions to ask. And then, do Mr. Rogers? Right? People do remember Mr. Rogers, right? I don't know how, I'm not that old. Sweet, okay, cool. There's this segment. Have people heard or seen the thing about the look for the helpers? Anyone familiar with this, right? He had this thing on one of his episodes, was very famous, where he said, talk about a story when he would see something upsetting on the news, and he'd be upset or he'd be scared, and his mom would tell him, well, just look for the helpers. There are always people who are helping, right? So look for the helpers. Look for the helpers. And, this is one other quote for something way less family-friendly than Mr. Rogers, because this is actually from Mark Manson's book, the Subtle Art of Not Giving an Expletive. Where he says, right, if someone is better than you at something, chances are they have failed at it more than you. Cool, right? Find those people. Find those people. And what we're really talking about then here is mentorship. Mentorship is critical for me. Critical. I couldn't do anything without developing mentorship relationships with tons of different people. all over the industry, all over my life. And mentorship's kind of an interesting thing too, right? Because people hear this word mentorship. I'm going to go back here and take more water. People hear this word mentorship, and it kind of, for some people, they get jazzed up about it. They're excited, like, yeah, I'm going to develop a mentor relationship. I'm going to find a mentor. I'm going to be a mentor. And we get this idea of like, I'm going to schedule time. I'm going to get on their calendar. We're going to go sit down. We're going to have coffee. It's going to be great. We're going to have this deep conversation. I'm going to ask questions and be a very structured thing. It can be. That's great. But again, mentorship, right? Like, it's okay to just have like the hallway conversation. That, I think, can be a lot more powerful than worrying about like finding the exact right mentor all the time, right? You find someone who you trust, or you think you might trust, or who said something interesting, and it keys in on something that you're thinking about. It's like, yeah, can we go talk about that? Just step aside, like, hey, let's chat for a few minutes. That's still mentorship, and the reason for that is because when we talk about mentorship, let's talk about language again, right? You know, adversity versus transitions. I don't think about mentorship at all, really. Like, I say it's really important to me, but I never think about mentorship. I think about relationships, right? So mentorship is kind of, it's just relationships, right? Relationships can be hard, but like starting them doesn't have to be, right? I mentioned, Jeremy Clark is here. He talks about like the social developer and about how it can be a powerful thing. Just walk up and say, hey, I'm Jeff. And start a conversation. Maybe it's just a quick conversation, no big deal, but if you see someone, you meet somebody interesting, like key in on them and just spend a few minutes, you can start new relationships. And you don't necessarily have to find someone who is the guru in this thing because, again, you're stuck. Your lifelong SQL DBA, and all of a sudden there's NoSQL and there's graph databases and all those things, and I'm not a database guy, so I don't know how any of that works. But you're in this sort of brave new world. You don't have to go find the best person ever who's done this thing to mentor you. You just find people who have other ideas that might help you grow. And when you think about it in terms of relationships, then the other thing that you realize, which is really powerful, is when it stops being mentorship and starts being a relationship, for me, I realize it's a two-way street. Right? So the person who you are mentoring is also being mentored by you because you're really just in a relationship. And when you realize that, then you can kind of take it a step further. So one of my mentors, this is going to sound ridiculous, okay? One of my mentors is my son. He's 6.5. Not joking. He is also incredibly naturally talented with empathy. And naturally gifted at knowing me somehow. I think it's because he's like little me. Like in all the good and all the terrible, frightening ways. But he gets me. So when I'm struggling, like it's amazing the things come out of his mouth. And if I just listen to my own kid, he says things because he's able to have simplicity. He isn't an expert in the thing that I'm worried about. So because he can distill that down, he can offer simple truths that help me figure out where it is I need to go. So sometimes you can find amazing relationships in people where you don't expect it. Let's go back to our wall. Who like grew up in the, say, late 70s through late 80s? Handful of people. All right. Who knows what that guy is? Yeah. Yeah. So if you grew up in the 80s and you never saw Labyrinth, shame on you. But if you didn't grow up in the 80s, go check out this movie. First of all, it's like David Bowie at his like spandex finest. It's ridiculous. But also, it's like young Jennifer Connelly and tons of some of the weirdest Jim Henson Muppets since Dark Crystal. And one of them is this little like worm guy, right? And so Jennifer Connelly gets into this maze, and she's sitting there, and she has no idea where to go or what to do. And she looks in every direction, and all she sees is like a brick wall corridor. She looks this way, and it's a brick wall corridor, and she sits down against the wall, and she hears, hello, right? And she turns into this little worm. Right? Totally unassuming. But this worm, she said, literally, there's a quote, right? Do you know the way out of the maze? Who, me? No, I'm just a worm. Right? But then she says, I don't know what to do. I can't get out of here. And the worm says, there's an exit right there. And she looks at the wall. It's like, it's just a brick wall. It's just a brick wall. It's like, no, go. Check it out. And meanwhile, the worm's, trying to get her to come in and meet the missus and drink tea. But it's like, but there's an exit right there. And she stands up, and maybe when you least expect it, the least assuming mentor might say, look, like there's the door. It's right in front of you. Right? So don't be afraid to hear people, even when they're not the people that you would have expected to get help from. So that's mentorship, which leads into sort of the third thing. Now, we have doors. Hey, I don't normally do memes, but like, okay, what do you do like when like opportunity knocks at the door? When opportunity knocks? Open the door. Open the door. I'm terrible at this. I'm like, I'm really, really bad at this. Really bad. Right. I mean, I feel very fortunate. I've been in this community, speaking and being involved in tech media, organizing events, things for like 10 years. And I feel very fortunate that I have great friends throughout the industry. And like when I was going through challenges, every time I go through challenges, I have so many people who have tried to come and say, hey, no, look, here's an opportunity. I'm like, oh, that looks good. I think I'm going to go over here. I'm like, no, then here's the door over there. It's like, well, it doesn't look like anything to me. And and you don't, some people see Westworld, that's really good, thank you. But realistically, right, the thing about opening a door, like we all know this, like in our heads, but like maybe like our sunshine and rainbows are like on the other side of the door. And we're afraid to open the door and even look. Now, why are we afraid to open the door and look? Why am I afraid to open the door and look? Because I totally am. Totally. One of two things, right? Either we might open the door and find what we're looking for and then freak out. I had a great conversation just this morning, actually, with Art Doler, who was speaking. I think he already had to go home. But, he was talking about how he recently was accepted to like this big international conference. He's going to be speaking in Norway in a couple of weeks. And when he got in, instead of being excited, he was like, oh, God. And then he freaked out, right? Because maybe we're afraid we're going to open the door and actually get what we want, and then we aren't sure what to do with that. Or the other thing is, maybe we're just afraid that when we open the door, like, no, it's really just another closed room. All right, so what? So what? Like, we're already in this terrible starting over thing, and we're struggling with it. So like, I'm not telling people, by the way, because I've had this conversation with people where they say, oh, well, you open the door and you drop what you're doing, and you're closing other doors behind you, and like maybe it doesn't work out, and you're like losing your job. I'm not telling you to all go quit your jobs. I didn't say that. Please don't do that. And if you do, don't say, well, I saw Strauss at Music City, and he said I should quit my job, and so like mic drop and walk out. Please don't do that. Okay? What I'm saying is, open the door, and like peek, look around. Like the door's not going to slam shut behind you most of the time. And if it is going to slam shut behind you, you probably know that. Right? So like peek around. Because here's the thing, maybe it's another room, but like here's the thing, it's not like every door has to get you to like your ultimate goal. Maybe it's a closed room, but if you look around some more, there's another door at the other end, and maybe the sunshine and rainbows are behind that door. So like look around long enough to say, hey, is this what I want? Is this getting me where I need to go? That's what I do anyway. And maybe there's not. Maybe there's not. So that's fine, like take a couple steps back. Go find your worm friend, find another door. But the bottom line of like recognizing opportunity is that if you do that, when opportunities arise, like don't just don't get stuck like that. Like don't be her, right? Don't be anxious or terrified to even check it out and see what's there, right? Like approach it more like be her, be that one. Right? Here's opportunity. Let's check it out. Right? Embrace it with open arms. Worst case, it wasn't what you were looking for, or it didn't help you solve your problem, or it didn't help you learn that new thing, or it was a dead end as you were trying to do some research or whatever else. That's fine. That's fine. But like best case, maybe it like takes you to the finish line, right? Like maybe you reach your goals. Right? Which kind of leads to the fourth thing, which is sort of the fourth thing and sort of the first thing at the same time. Right? Which is actually paying attention and knowing your goals. Know what it is you're trying to do. That, again, sounds obvious. Sometimes not. I spent the bulk of my professional adult life thinking my goal, my end goal, was I needed to be a small business owner. That's what I grew up in. Right? Like my family, my father's a very successful small business owner. He's owned several. He's done very well. Most of my family does that. That's what I was bred for. So for most of my life, I thought that was actually the goal. I'm not saying I won't go back and try that again, right? But like, you got to sort of be able to get there. So remember, like, going back to the 80s, early 90s, when you win the Super Bowl, like, Phil Simms, you just won Super Bowl 30, whatever. Like, what are you going to do next? Right? Yeah, you're going to go to Disney World. And here's the thing, like, going to Disney World is really awesome. But the reason he's able to get there is because, like, he wanted to do the things and take the steps and follow the path, and he always knew what the goal was. And I say goal, I forgot about the Pirates one. I'm like on a Disney kick here, right? So like, it's the idea of basically just keep your eye on the prize. Now, goals and purpose, two different things. And I don't mean this in, again, like any sort of a self-helpy or like spiritual way, just simply goals and purpose to me aren't the same thing. Goals are like, what am I trying to accomplish? What are the immediate tasks that get me to a thing I'm trying to do? And when I think about purpose, it's more like, hey, I want to own a small business. Well, why? Well, I like the idea of independence, and I want independence. Well, why? Well, that independence maybe gives me the opportunity to spend more time with my family or pursue other things on the side, whatever else. But like you keep going, and until I reach the point, and I'm trying to do this more now than I've ever done in the past. Until I reach the point where I say, well, why is that the goal? And the answer is, well, because that feels fulfilling to me, right? That's what it is I'm trying to do. Then I haven't actually found the real purpose. I'm just having intermediary goals, right? So once you understand, like, well, I wanted to own the business because I wanted the independence, because I wanted the family time, because I wanted, okay, well, now we're getting somewhere, because maybe like owning a small business, right? Or working in this particular technology stack, or having this particular kind of role or job isn't really the thing that mattered. And maybe there's other things you can do to get there. Think about who's... People see Inside Out. I'm really on a Disney kick this part. Like, I love this movie. Remember, I was a psychology major. But, right, so if you haven't seen this movie, right, this is a girl, I think her name is Riley, and like most of the movie takes place inside her brain, right? And we have these little kind of weird figmenty things that are all of her core emotions, but we're not worried about the emotions. I want to worry about these big islands back here. They called her pillars or islands of personality. Right, like the idea there, and this movie really got me thinking about a lot of things when I watched it. It's like, Pixar is amazing, right, because they have kids' movies, and they have these deep embedded themes that adults can watch, be like, oh, that was awesome, it really made me think. So the idea was, they weren't necessarily realistic, but she had like the silliness island and the hockey island, and right, but those were her core, like those are the things that she was looking for. That's the purpose. All the other goals, we're trying to always point towards one of those. Now, they may come crumbling down every once in a while. And again, that's okay. So it's not, hey, this is me, I'm defining me as me. I mean, we're still agile, right? So it's more, this is who I am right now. Figure out who it is that I am now. How can I make sure that I fulfill those things that matter to me today? Right, and how do I get there? And if it changes over time, that's all right. It's all right. So those are the steps. My four steps. Basically, objective self-assessment, developing mentorship through key relationships, recognizing opportunity and opening the door and looking around, and then keeping that keen focus on both my goals and my real purpose, what it is I'm trying to achieve. Now, I'm telling you, I'm not kidding. It's not like this is sort of a go do this. All I'm saying is like, these are my tools, right? It works for me. Works for me. Right? It's like, you're welcome to fork it and tweak it and do other things. Right? But I think what really matters is that we learn to embrace sort of this idea that when we see something new and it might paralyze us, or when we hit a roadblock in our careers, our lives, and we aren't sure like where to go and how to then proceed to like do something with this new thing we've gotten, to embrace that and realize that that's like a good opportunity and not like a reason to freak out. Like in our industry, things change. Like that's not going to stop. Right? That's not going to stop. So I come and I watch. I said before, changes in the data platforms, data science, changes in the way we build software. Just watching JavaScript developers try desperately to be JavaScript developers, and I am one, right? But like, you want to talk about a model for a constant change, Right? If I freaked out every time I learned about a new JavaScript library, I would seriously, like, instead of these 4 steps, my step would be curling up in a corner with a bottle of whiskey and crying until next Thursday. So, which sometimes works, but only in the short term, right? Like, it really only works in the short term. So instead, like, right, it's this idea of change. Now, I stole this literally from John Mills, so I will give him attribution. During conversation today, I changed it a little bit because I somewhat disagreed. He gave me this thing. He says, he said, grow to love the adversity. You need to grow to love the adversity that makes you reach your goal, right? And I said, well, first of all, I don't want to use that adversity word, right? Because I don't want to think about it as adversity. But it is important to grow to love and appreciate those transitions that get you in the right direction. Appreciate them for what they are, right? Enjoy them for what they are and find a way to say, hey, I've got these different choices of things I need to do, and they both seem equally great right now, but like I know where it is I'm trying to get to. I know what it is I need to accomplish. I know what it is that will help me and my community, my family, whatever, and make the right decisions. So, like, it's just because I never use memes in talks, and I love the little baby guy. He's like 13 now or something, right? But the bottom line is, look, if you walk out of here and you feel like all you've got is sunshine and rainbows, I'm super happy for you, and that's great. Like, really. If you are going through a period either now or in the future where, like, that ever-changing landscape or whatever else happens in your life or your career gets you like you're feeling there's a wall, like, that's okay. Right? Find the steps that work for you and take a step back. It's the hardest to do when you're right in it. Take a step back and say, okay, so plan for it before you're in that space and say, all right, here's how I will step through it, right? Because maybe the very next transition is the thing that will actually help you get to Disney World, right? And really all it takes is sometimes a single spark. So that's it. Thank you for listening.